Well, hey, everybody. My name is Eric Waldrop. I'm with Your Next Step Leadership Coaching, and I am here with my friend Mary Power. Mary, thanks for being with me today.
Eric, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Hey, guys, our topic today is we are talking about how leaders can grow more resilient as they are leading in various responsibilities that they're in. And Mary, you have a lot of experience with this. And so before we get into our conversation, Mary, speak a little bit to some of your experience in leadership, just so people can have a context of where you're coming from.
Oh, thanks, Eric. Well, I feel like I've lived in the land of resilience for many years. I started in corporate America in the hospitality industry and lived through two or three large cultural mergers, which required some organizational and personal leadership. And then I was fortunate enough to be selected as the CEO of the Convention Industry Council, which is a federation of 30 associations all involved in the meetings and exhibition industry. And as I was trying to move the organization forward, we experienced September 11th.
Wow.
So when we look at resilience from an organizational standpoint, I had a lot of opportunities to observe individuals and organizations become incredibly resilient and some that didn't.
Right.
So great learning on the field. And then I left there and became CEO of the HR Certification Institute. And my task was to create a global certification. And because of the proprietary nature of the program that we developed, which was not knowing the laws of every country, which is not really possible, but trying to understand the questions that would help you hone into the essential laws you'd need. We had to launch simultaneously in 49 countries.
Wow.
So our staff was amazingly resilient, and some of our launch sites were incredibly resilient because, as you can imagine, there were an awful lot of things that kept popping up.
You mean things don't always go as planned? Is that what you're saying?
Sadly, we were brilliant, but we all sat in the room when the pilot was launching around the world.
Yeah.
And back then, before cell phones and everything, there was a big fax machine in the middle of the table and a phone, because there was only one phone number and with all the extensions. And we were sitting there waiting for the call that told us what we hadn't thought of or what we hadn't done or how our plan hadn't worked. So even though now I'm an executive leadership coach, I draw on the years of my corporate and nonprofit experience because resiliency seems to be a theme in our world today. And if anything, it's becoming more and more an essential ingredient in leadership.
Absolutely, because today, as you think about the COVID-19 and everything that leaders are going through and adapting to all the changes in their organizations that this has brought on, some of the cultural things that are happening right now. We're in an election year here in 2020. There's a lot of change and a lot of things flying right into the face of leaders, and they're having to be resilient. So as we get into this, first, Mary, can you define what resilience means?
Well, I'll give you my definition. There's probably better ones out there, but my definition is the ability for an individual and organization to face adversity, get knocked down, and either bounce back to the same point or preferably stronger from the experience.
Right. Oh, that's good. That's good. So getting knocked down is going to be a reality in a leader's life, is what I'm hearing you say.
Absolutely. And sometimes it's a big punch, and sometimes it's a series of small setbacks.
Right.
It doesn't matter. Resilience, we think of resilience for the great hero and the terrible experience, which is very much a part of it. But you know what? Resilient people learn to sidestep some of the problems, or they get a small bump. Their plan didn't work. And I think really the small bumps where you show resilience build that muscle. So when the really big situation comes, you are much more prepared, or your team is much more prepared to deal with it.
Right. Why do you feel like this is such a hot topic today?
Well, right now, they use a military term. A lot of the consultants today talk about VUCA. And the world is, let's see if I get volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. My VUCA has two C's because in addition to complex, I have constantly changing. So
Oh, yeah.
that's our world today. We
Yeah.
are living in a VUCA world, and that was long before COVID arrived.
Right.
So COVID is just the exclamation point on a VUCA world.
Yeah. And,
And
and, and people experience VUCA, I think, probably even in their families, even in their organizations, with their staff, and they're constantly having to pivot and adjust to all of those things all at the same time, right?
exactly. The
Mhm.
day of here's the day of the 10-year plan, and the day of one person having all the information to be able to make good decisions is gone.
Right.
Our technology has jettisoned us into a world where change is the constant.
Mm,
And I like to say we live in a microwave society.
right.
Dinner used to be an hour or two with a roast in the oven, and now if it's not microwaved or you go through the drive-through, it's not
Right.
happening.
Right. Right. Mary, what do you feel like makes people resilient?
Well, Eric, there's a lot of I take it as a bundle of
Hmm.
competencies and behaviors.
Okay.
Number one is self-confidence.
Mm,
Because if you do not have self-confidence, you're going to be timid. You're going to hold back.
hmm.
When something comes, it's way too easy to knock you down. So I
Right.
would say one of the biggest and best is self-confidence. It's also, I'd say, flexibility.
Mm,
It's optimism and curiosity, a willingness to learn from mistakes and also take risks.
mm,
Underneath that is core, it's a non-judgmental mind. Because if you judge either situations or yourself all the time, that's a lot of self-criticism,
yeah.
erodes your ability to see new ideas and new possibilities.
Right.
It's really critical when you're under stress,
Mm,
because when you think about it, under stress, you go into your fight or flight. You don't say, oh, there's a tiger. I've got multiple opportunities to think about what do I do here? It's like,
right.
no, do I stay or do I go? And
Right.
under stress, we have a tendency to limit our focus into either or thinking.
Yeah.
And that is incredibly dangerous when there are so many things out there. So
Right.
it's almost a self-discipline of saying, all right, I think it's got to be either this or this, but well, let me back up. Is there
Right.
another option? Is there a better way?
I love so much about what you said. Under stress, we go into either or thinking. And correct me if I'm wrong. Would we call that binary thinking, where it's either like black or white? It's either left or right. Those types of things.
Exactly. Or it's either good. The dangerous one is it's either good or bad. There's no gray.
Mm,
It's black or
yeah.
white. And gray is okay. That's where the creativity is. But where
Yeah.
we get into, especially as individuals and as leaders, and in dealing with people, that situation is either good or bad. That
Right.
is either success or failure.
Mm,
And what you need to say is that didn't work. What did we learn from it? And there's a lot of talk today about failing fast. I think you should, as a leader, have a lot of small bets out there so
yeah.
that you can fail fast and learn. And they talk about celebrating failure. But the key is there's a difference between failure because your idea that you worked on, planned for, didn't work the way you thought, versus incompetence where someone failed to do what they should do. That
Mm,
should never be celebrated. Now, you should learn from that for the
right.
individual, but so often when we talk about celebrating failure, they lump everything in the same bucket, and
Yeah.
I view it a little bit differently.
Mary, the first quality in the bundle that you suggested that really helps people become resilient, you said self-confidence.
Mm-hmm.
In your opinion, what builds self-confidence?
Well, there's a complementing value that I didn't mention. It was one more that was on my list that I think is really important.
Hmm.
Is it's clarity about what you can control and what you can't, which
Mm,
feeds self-confidence, and then also courage.
mm,
And courage isn't lack of fear. Courage is the ability to act despite fear and move forward in the face of adversity. And that kind of loops back to the self-confidence.
right.
Because you think, oh, I could never do that. I just don't have that kind of courage.
Yeah.
No, the courage is saying, yeah, I'm afraid
Right.
and I'm still going to do it. Or I
Yeah.
have no clue, but I know I'm going to do the next best thing and see
Right.
how it turns out. Uh,
Mary, what built self-confidence in you?
Making a lot of mistakes and learning from them, tell you.
Yeah.
um, and I also think it's an innate desire to win, but not win at all costs. Because I think what drew me to
Mm,
running nonprofits is the mission and making a difference.
yeah.
And I think it's that balance. It's not just about you. Self-confidence is that you have a belief in that you have a mission or a calling, but it's not just about you. It's bringing other people along. And to me,
I love
that's the
that.
difference: self-confidence versus self-centered.
Mm, that's a great distinction between being self-confident and self-centered.
Mm-hmm.
Is self-confidence is that you're wanting the best not only for yourself but for your team, and you feel that sense of mission, that purpose that is
Right.
driving you, right? But
Mhm.
self-centered is what it's all about.
Me.
Me. Yeah,
Right.
that's
Right.
so good. Okay, can resilience be learned?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because when you think about it, um, you may have some natural tendencies, but they still have to be honed and developed.
Right.
Think about flexibility. Some people are naturally more laid back,
Yeah.
uh, but that doesn't apply to every situation.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't care where we go for dinner, but boy, if I'm working on a project, it's got to be done this way. So, and so the ability to stand back and say, well, does it have to be done this way? Is
Mm,
there a better way to do it? That's flexibility.
yeah. Yeah.
It, the other thing is, in addition to being learned and modeled, because as a leader, you need to model resilient behaviors, there's also behaviors that have to be unlearned. I do a lot of work
Mm,
with conflict management.
okay.
And in conflict management, just as in building resiliency, there's constructive behaviors and there's destructive behaviors.
Okay.
And to create a resilient organization or to become a resilient leader, you have to unlearn your destructive habits, like avoidance or
Okay.
denial,
Yeah.
or the need to be right, or
Mm,
inflexibility. And so
yeah.
part of it is knowing your blind spots and knowing yourself well enough to say what behaviors, and some have gotten me to this high level of leadership, but they're not helping me become resilient.
Can you give me an example in your life of a behavior that you had to unlearn at a certain leadership post that you were in?
Absolutely is when I was running the Convention Industry Council and we were dealing with 9/11. It I used to say, okay, we've got a plan, we're going to follow the plan. We didn't have a plan. and
Wow.
and
Yeah.
you have to learn to adjust and adapt. It's like I was always very focused in, all right, what are the first three things we need to do? How, let's think ahead, let's have a plan. Um, we didn't, but the
Yeah.
fact that we had planned previously allowed us to think through the situation and say, how do we deal with it? But if I
Mm,
had been so locked into, wait, we don't have a plan yet, then in the first 48 hours, we would not have been able to respond as quickly.
yeah.
Uh, so,
Yeah. So what I hear you saying, if I'm correct, is that you create that plan, but it's subject to change based upon the situation that you may run into, the people that you have, all those types of things, is to hold it loosely and be able to pivot if you need to.
exactly. And also realize we made that plan with this amount of information. As new information comes in,
So good.
can't stick to the plan. So the plan is a good outline,
Hmm.
but it's only a tool to help you think logically.
Right.
But as new information comes in, as new needs come in, you've got to be able to adjust.
Right. Right. This is, you bring up a good point about being able to mine for that information from your team, from the project that you're working on, from the context of everything happening, is
Mhm.
because the more information that we have, the better our decisions, I think, can be. Right.
I totally agree. When I was in tough situations, the first thing I would ask my team was, what information don't we have that we need?
Ooh.
Because we have a tendency to go, okay, I know this, we're going to operate because I know this. But if you take one more moment and say, okay, is there a piece of information we need to know that we don't? Now, it may be we don't know it and we can't learn it.
Right.
Then we operate around it, but at least we're aware that our plan is missing this
Yeah.
big item. And I think
Yeah.
that's really, really critical.
To me, what I also hearing you say that you're not saying is you've got to let your ego go,
Yep. Hmm.
right? Because our ego kind of wants us to, we know everything, we know, all the information, we don't want to look stupid, we want to be in charge, all that. What I hear you saying is we need really to assume that there may be information we don't know, and we need to go find that information.
Right. And it's a delicate balance in a crisis, say a
Mm,
big crisis, is the leader wants to be the one out in charge, leading the field. This is what's happening. And there's a certain element that's critical because people are looking to you. But I also think a leader has to be honest. I know this, I don't know this.
right.
But it's more important to say, but when I do, this is how I'm going to report it back. This is how you're going to know. So people have the comfort that they are dealing with the situation,
Right.
but also they're engaging the people that are on the front lines. They're engaging the people that know best and not saying, I'm the leader, I have to make all the decisions.
Right.
It's the ability to say, my job is to ask the right questions and to get the right people that have the best answers. Not, as you say, let your ego say, I have all the answers. No one ever has all the answers. And today it's less so. So you just got to be real.
Absolutely, especially in a world where things are flying at us so quickly, and we just don't, it can be overwhelming. So, resilience. Some would say, it could be a personal quality. The way you were brought up and your
Mhm.
family had some influence on that.
Mhm.
Speak to that a little bit.
Well, I think that it complements your natural tendencies,
Hmm.
and how you were raised, or your family unit now. A lot of it has to do with safety. If
Mm.
you are, if you have, in fact, that is a core element of resiliency, in that you've got to feel safe to be brave. You have
Wow.
to have a safety net. So whether it's a team you can count on, whether it's family and friends, you have to be more than out there on your own.
Yeah.
You've got to feel, one, that you're part of something greater, and that you've got support. Uh,
What makes people feel safe in your experience?
well, I think you feel safe if you know that, there are boundaries, and you feel safe that you know that you've got tools or resources, that can support you, and most importantly, you feel safe. If someone's got your back.
Right.
So, if as a leader, your safety is built in. Have I put the right team together? Have I put the right structure together so that I'm not doing this all by myself?
Mm.
You know, I'm not walking out alone without any support, without any resources, without any tools. Now, I may not have all the tools I need, but I've got some. And
Yeah.
that fuels, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. No. 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 Go for it.
Okay. And that fuels your belief that you can win. You've got to believe in a VUCA world, you've got to believe that you can manage.
Mm.
If you don't feel safe and you don't feel you have the tools, having self-confidence and having, the thought that I can do this, the courage, if you will, it's not going to work.
Yeah. Mary, is there an example where looking back on a lot of your history, maybe it's in coaching or maybe it's some of the businesses that you led, where where you made people feel safe? Was there anything in particular that you did that maybe it was with one particular team member, or maybe it's in your organization? Is there anything you can look back and go, I remember when I did this, it helped people just kind of breathe a little bit and help them relax and feel safe?
Yeah, well, one of the things I think about executive coaching, that's what we do. We offer safe space for people, for leaders to come in and say,
Yeah.
I'm not sure. But an example in work, Eric, is when I was with HRCI and was brought in to take the organizational global. I talked about how exciting it was going to be, and this is what we're going to do. And we are going to hire a global staff where we're hiring people where English may not be their first language, or maybe they lived in another country, or studied in another country, or had family in another country, that we were really going to open our own personal horizons before we tried to open up our programs. And two or three people from our call center came into my office and said, Mary, I've never been north of Baltimore. Am I going to be part of this new situation? I said, yeah. And I said, and we're going to develop the tools internally first so that you're comfortable doing it. And so I realized it was a great learning for me is I should have said that first. I was saying, we're going to build the team before we try to be global. But what I missed was, and the team that's here is critical to learning and changing. And so I had to back up a little bit. And what we did is I paired everybody in teams, and everybody had a country to talk about the HR practices in that country and who are the sports heroes and what foods. And so they presented a country of their choice and became very competitive. And by the end, we had food and we had dance and we had all sorts of things happening. So it was good. But my learning was I didn't make them feel safe. I tried to get them excited, which I think I did. But I first had to make them feel safe, so that then they could be excited in a positive way versus, ooh, this is exciting but scary.
Well, and what I heard you say is that over communication with people and the clarification, communication and clarification helps people be able to know what the leader is thinking, know if they're going to have those resources and tools, and their stress level goes down, right?
Right.
That's so good.
And in times of resilience, what the leader has to do is really three things. They've got to be clear. Ambiguity breeds mediocrity. I've always said in any situation, in a time of crisis, it is critical. And also, just because you said something once, people are distracted. There's a lot going on. They're nervous. They may not have heard what you said once. So clear repetition and information tied to the individual. By that, I mean, all right, here's the problem. Here's the solution, at least as far as we know. Here's what the leaders are doing. You also have to say, and here's how it impacts you. Because if you're only talking about me as the leader, or us, the leadership team, the rest of your team is a little bit lost. And so you also have to think through, how does it impact the most junior person on the team? And you've got to tailor your messages to your unique audiences.
That's so good.
A resilient leader doesn't have one size fits all when it comes to messaging. Sorry.
No, that's so good. When you said the phrase, I saw you light up. Ambiguity breeds mediocrity.
Yeah.
How did you learn that?
Well, when you are working with organizations in times of change, what you see is, if you're willing to do the debrief, you say, what went wrong? And often we weren't clear about what we wanted, or we made assumptions, heaven forbid, that everyone knows this. Do they? And the other part of ambiguity, especially in resilient organizations, is people have to know their role. They have to know what they're allowed. What are they empowered to do? Because part of a resilient organization is each individual has a feeling of agency, and they've got to be able to operate within their wingspan. And so if you want to build a resilient organization, you first have to work on the culture. And then you work on the behaviors and the norms that support that culture. And what you want is a learning culture.
Yeah.
When you think about resilience, and this is always the visual I start with people, is if something is tense and stiff, one strong pop shatters the window. It doesn't have any flex.
Good.
And what gives an organization flex are the roots. If you think of a willow tree, it's not particularly strong, and it's kind of wispy, but it's got deep roots. And so it can flex with the winds and the challenges that come because it's got deep roots. And the roots of your organization are the behaviors, the norms, and the culture that you've established.
Yeah.
Along with the purpose and the mission, because people have to be clear
on
what we're doing. What's the big picture?
Well, in your experience of coaching leaders and working with leaders in your organizations, what have you seen that's helped people become flexible?
A couple, they're learned behaviors, I think. Number one is the pause. It sounds so simple, but how often are you on a roll and you're thinking something, you're doing something, and you just go? And if you could pause, say, are there other options? Or how is the person receiving this? It allows for learning. and
That's
it
so
allows
good.
you to adjust. But if you're so intent on what you're doing and you're marching so fast, you're missing some of that new information that's come in that would cause you to adjust your plan or cause you to adjust what you're doing, but you've blown past it.
Well, you said just a minute ago that a resilient organization is a learning organization.
Mhm.
And it sounds like to me that if we're able to pause in those moments and step back from what I hear you say, step back and kind of learn and absorb like what's happening and not just continuing to trudge through with our plan, but pause, step back. What can I learn from what I'm experiencing and seeing? And do I need to adjust and flex, right?
In a learning organization too, a lot. We used to do it, and I think it's fairly common. But we start with a pre-mortem. We always talk about the post-mortem. What went right, what went wrong afterwards. But in
Mm,
a learning organization, as you're setting out your plan, is what could go wrong, and how do we anticipate? So you're already building a little spring. I think of a tennis player. You know how they kind of bounce a little bit before they
yes.
start, they bend their knees.
Yes.
To me, that's what a pre-mortem is.
That's
It's like,
good.
okay, here's the plan. What could derail it? What else could happen? So you're already starting that pause practice
Hmm.
of, all right, instead of just, all right, we got the plan, go. Before we launch, what are we missing? What haven't we thought about? Doesn't mean you'll think of everything. You can't.
Right.
But then as things change, you're like, whoa, wait, this might be, something important. You put your
Yeah.
intent up. And it is such a fast-paced world today. We go, go, go. And so I think taking those pauses, kind of peeking up out of the foxhole and looking around
Right.
before you dig a little farther underground is going to be really, really key. And
Hmm.
also um, allowing your people that are on the front lines the opportunity to pause, observe, and give feedback.
Mm.
The bigger the organization, the greater the challenge that you've lost touch with your customers or your members because you're all caught up in the plans and the thinking, which is important. But the people that are touching the customer every day have a lot of insights and a lot of information, and you need to be able to mine that information.
That's so good. I love incorporating some pause practices in your
Mhm.
leadership to really just continue to become that learning leader, that which leads to that learning organization. You were saying something a minute ago, and it made me have a thought about knowing that culture is such a big piece to a resilient organization. Healthy and good, strong culture helps with that. What are things that leaders unconsciously do that could hurt their culture from being resilient? Are there any maybe unhealthy habits, going back to what you said, that we may need to unlearn, that
Mhm.
we unconsciously do? We may not even be aware that we're doing it, but we need to pay attention to.
Right. Well, absolutely. A leader that's trying to develop a culture for a resilient organization, one of the first things they have to do is learn emotional regulation.
Ooh,
They're going to be angry. They're going to be frustrated. But how they demonstrate it, they're going to be triggered. I mean, we all have hot spots. We all have hot buttons. And a good leader says, okay, knows themselves, knows their blind spots, as we know, everyone has
mm,
them. But if you know
good.
your triggers and you could say, okay, when I'm triggered, my automatic default is to go to this behavior, which usually isn't a positive behavior. I go to anger. I go to this. I go to
Yeah,
that. You're like,
yeah,
and most people say, I can't help myself.
yeah,
Well, yes, you can.
yeah.
But you can help yourself by saying, okay, if when I'm triggered, I do this, when you're not triggered, when you're in the calm, quiet of a moment, you can look
Right.
at yourself and say, okay, when I'm triggered next time, what would be a better behavior?
Yeah.
And then practice it so that when you're in that moment and you are triggered, you don't automatically go to that default behavior.
Mm,
Makes a world of difference. But so that is, I think, an important part of developing the culture. The other thing that
yeah.
we often do, is
Yeah.
the opposite of a learning culture is a judging culture. And
Ooh,
that is one of the most dangerous cultures. And that's if the rules are too strict and you go back to that, it's right or it's wrong, it's good or it's bad. A judging culture really erodes people's self-confidence too, because they don't want to be wrong. They're so afraid of being wrong. And any leader, but even really good leaders, are always very hard on themselves. But there's a difference between, this is a situation I didn't do well, this is a situation that backfired, what can I learn from it, versus, how could I have been such an idiot? I can't believe
Yeah.
that wrong.
Yeah.
And if your culture is a judging culture, your people judge themselves, and that erodes their curiosity, it erodes their self-confidence, erodes a lot of the competencies and behaviors that are critical for a resilient organization.
Mary, can you give me an example of what the leader does to the team in a judging culture?
One of the things is they don't celebrate wins. How
Mm.
many times have you been in an organization where people just killed themselves and they had a big win, and the boss goes, "Hey guys, that was great. The annual meeting was outstanding, or the product launch was really great. Thank you. Now, blah 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 blah." Like they
On to the
acknowledged
next one.
it, but they gave for 9 months, 1 year
Yeah.
worth of incredible work. They got like 6 seconds, and then boom, right to, or you know what, you guys did a great job. That program launch was fabulous. Now, the 2 or 3 things that didn't work well were blah blah blah. That's a judging culture, you
Right.
know, and it's not learning. And a
Right.
learning culture also celebrates.
Hmm.
A judging culture does not celebrate.
Mm. That's really good.
And often it's inadvertent, but we're so busy. Yeah, but you can celebrate. And you
Hmm.
don't always have to throw a big party, but maybe 10 minutes, or
Yeah.
hey, what are people really excited about? Or what are you most proud of? Or, engage
Yeah.
everyone else in that celebration.
Yeah.
There will always be time to learn. And in any situation, you can do better. But it's how it's presented
Yeah.
and how it's approached.
Mm.
That's the difference between a judging organization, in my mind, and a learning one.
That's really good. All right. So talk to us about what it means to implement a resilient strategy in your organization. What does that look like?
I think the strategy is to develop the culture and the systems that reinforce the culture and the behaviors, uh, hiring for the right people, and then creating the environment where those resilient type people will thrive.
Mm.
So often we try to hire resilient people and figure that's going to make a resilient organization. But if you don't have the structures in place, if you don't support and encourage those resilient behaviors, you may hire people that are very resilient and they're not going to thrive in your organization. And your organization isn't automatically going to become a resilient organization.
Right. Right.
So really the strategy is to look at how resilient, what behaviors does our current culture
Hmm.
encourage and support? Well, first of all, do we have, I
Yeah.
go all the way back to, do we have a solid culture? You
Yeah.
got to start with the basis.
Yeah.
Then do gap analysis and say, what do we currently have that makes us resilient?
Mm.
And quite frankly, as a leader, start with yourself. Am I a resilient leader? Because everyone looks to the boss.
Yeah.
What behaviors am I modeling?
Mm.
Because before you try to build a resilient organization, if you do not demonstrate resilient leadership, nobody's going to buy it.
Mary, speak to this because what you're saying is so profound because it starts with us as leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to how we define resilience in the very beginning, it's that ability to get back up after you've been knocked down.
Mm-hmm.
What do those behaviors and attitudes look like, even if you've been knocked down and you're trying to get up and you're trying to demonstrate this with your team? Talk to us a little bit about what that looks like for a leader.
Well, let's take you get knocked down. Let's say you were going to launch a product, and it was a special offering for students.
Mm-hmm.
And, you spent a lot of time on it, you worked on it, and it flopped. It really didn't get the traction you thought it would. Only a very small percentage of the students bought it. You could look at that and say, oh, that was a failure. We put so much time and effort, and get knocked down. Or you could get back up and say, or you could say, well, you know what? We've learned a lot. Who did buy it? Let's go interview people why they didn't buy it. Let's learn from this. That's getting back up.
I like that.
It flopped, but for someone that is not resilient, they let that keep them down. Oh, see, I knew it would work, or I shouldn't have tried that, or that's now the judging, self-critical mode.
Yeah.
You're in the learning mode. It's like, you know what? Okay, it didn't work, but that's data. And just because this didn't work doesn't mean it won't work in the future. We just need to learn a little more. We just need to understand more about our audience. And you know what? This is a pilot. This is when I talk about do a lot of small tests. You place a lot of small bets.
Right.
You don't work for months and months and months and try to make it perfect.
Right.
And then launch it and wait. What you do is what we did when we were launching globally. We would do pilots. We would say, all right, if we were going to do it in this country, how would it work? It would, unfortunately, because it was certification, you couldn't do practice certifications. But we'd say, okay, if we were going to do this, we would do this and this. How would that impact the audience? What factors do we need to think about? And so you learn. Part of it too is your attitude. When you look at the factors I was talking about, self-confidence, curiosity, optimism, a lot of it, and clarity on what you can control and what you can't control. We can't control what the customers are going to do, but we can do things that will help support positive behavior and try to minimize negative behavior. At the heart of resilience as a leader, it's really that self-confidence and that courage. And the best quote I think that kind of ties it together is Mark Twain. He says, "It's never the size of the dog in the fight. It's the size of the fight in the dog."
Yeah. Love it.
That's it. It's like, okay, it didn't work. All right, we're going to do better next time. And it's not denial. It's not naive. Well, we just need to keep trying and eventually it'll work. It's that learner mindset. All right, what didn't we think of? How can we make it better?
I love that. So speak to the importance of vulnerability and transparency on the part of the leader sharing with their team. Let's just say they've launched something and it flopped and they're learning from that. How can vulnerability and transparency help in that moment to send the message to the rest of the staff in the organization? I want to be honest about what's happened here and how that can help with building resiliency.
Right. Well, I'm a big fan of Brene Brown's definition of vulnerability. And vulnerability, by her definition, is willingness to go into a situation that you do not have control over and you do not have a known outcome. So many people think vulnerability is telling everybody all your weaknesses and all your faults and all your flaws. To me, that's therapy. Balance. But vulnerability is saying, guys, you know what? We thought this would work. And I really want to compliment the team. We did learn a lot, but it didn't work. You know what? And so we're going to own it. And so sometimes vulnerability is not saying I failed, I didn't do it. It's saying we worked as a team and we learned a lot and talk about the team. And so the mistake or the failure or the misstep quite often isn't the CEO's. It's not even a misstep, it's a learning opportunity. If they phrase it as a learning opportunity. That being said, when the leader makes a mistake, if they're the first to own it, then that speaks volumes. Like, guys, you know what? I misread the timing. I really pushed to have this out by February. And looking back now, I realized the better timetable would have been June. I caused the team to rush to do this. And so I own that piece of it.
That's good.
And I think some of the best words that a leader could ever say is, I own that piece of it. Because what it's saying to every employee is, in any situation, probably you own a piece of it. Even if it's 2%, you own a piece of it. And if you can create a culture where everybody says, all right, my contribution to the problem was this, and my contribution to the solution is this, and tie the two together, you have a resilient team, or you're well on your way to having a resilient team.
I really like the idea of helping people see their percentage
Hmm.
of that goal or challenge and helping them understand like how much a part of that they are. I love that. Go ahead.
So it's kind of like coaching.
Yeah.
Um, and it's reframing. If someone comes with a problem and said, I was totally wronged, this was done to me, this was terrible, and it was.
Yeah.
It was true. But often we look and say, okay, is there anything you could have done differently? It's not
Mhm.
blaming the person, but just saying,
Mhm.
okay, looking back now, because we're so
Right.
brilliant in hindsight, looking back, was there something that you did that may trigger the person or contributed? Not through any fault, it's not blame,
Mhm.
but is there any piece of that problem that you do own? And it may be 2%, but then they reframe it and say, oh, okay, wow, if I'm ever in a situation like that again, I now know what I have control over and
Mhm.
what I can do. And if someone reacts the way that person reacts, I now am wiser about how to respond and what may be triggering that person. That's a
Mhm.
that's a resilient view of a very bad situation
Mhm.
versus they are the evil one and I am the victim.
Right.
You don't learn anything in that. And
No.
also, you're not any better prepared to get into another situation because you've gotten into the either or. They're a bad guy, I'm a good guy.
Mhm. Again, it's that either or thinking that
Yeah.
really that really just hurts us in our leadership if that's the way we continue to think. Okay, so Mary, if there's somebody listening right now and they're watching this and they're going, I want to take a next step in my life in terms of becoming a more resilient leader. What would you advise them to do just for that next step right now?
Um, One, I would do a fearless inventory. Be really
Mm,
honest and say, what are my strengths and what are my weaknesses?
mm-hmm.
Um, and you've heard me say this many times, I know, Eric, but a strength overused is a weakness too. So often
So
people
good.
say, I'm very direct. That's a strength. In many
Hmm.
situations, it is, but not every. So
Right.
first, do an inventory, and then a couple things. Practice changing the narrative. When you look at a situation, you say, "Okay, this is happening. What do you see?" Now, if you want to be resilient, say, "Is there another interpretation of this, or is there
Mm,
another way to handle it?" So that starts with your flexibility.
that's so good. Hmm.
Also, we all have a tendency to ruminate. That didn't work. Why didn't it? I'm so mad. That instead say, wow, that didn't work. Is there a way to expand? So when you catch yourself, and we all do it, it's just, oh, I can't believe so and so dropped the ball there. I can't say, you know what? What caused him to drop the ball?
Mm-hmm.
Back up and reframe, but don't ruminate. You've
Right.
got to say, this happened. I'm acknowledging it, and I'm not putting any energy into it.
Mm-hmm.
What happens is when there's a problem, when there's a setback, what keeps us down is we keep replaying it over our head. So when you pick it like there's a big hand and you got slapped down, the more you think about it, you're allowing that hand to hold you down. If you say, yep, that happened, but I'm going to move on, the hand's released. And that allows you to pop up. In fact, pop up stronger and wiser because you've learned from the experience.
Well, and we can beat ourselves up as leaders because of something that we did that didn't come out or didn't turn out the way we thought it would. And then it goes back to destroying the self-confidence that you referred to as part of that first piece of developing resilience.
Right. And there's two other things that are really big, Eric. You've got to practice self-compassion. If you are constantly beating yourself up because you want to be better, you want to do better, any mistake you make is horrible, then you're not going to say, but I'm really good to other people. It spills out.
Mm,
Even the people that are following you are going to say, wow, he has no, or she has no tolerance for this or this. Then that backs them off. It's kind of like no one wants to hug a fire-breathing dragon.
that's
No one
true.
even wants to come close and say, hey, I got an idea or I got a
Yeah.
problem. So,
Hmm.
and the other is you've got to, a leader has to be balanced. You've got to create a calm space. You have
Mm,
to pray or meditate or have a mindful practice. You've got to find a way to settle yourself as a
mm,
leader. Because if you're off balance, you can't flex. You can't be resilient. It's going to be so easy to top you over.
mm.
So
That's so
that's
good.
really, really a
Hmm.
key point for even just to be not even a resilient leader, but really to be a strong leader. is you've got to create that sense of balance in your life and a place to refresh and refuel, because even the most expensive sports car can't run without gas.
Right.
You've got to find a way to hold it down.
Mary, I want to go back to something you just said before you talked about balance is self-compassion.
Yeah.
What is one way that you practice that?
I'm really bad at it. Which is one of the ones I really, really had to work at. Is so it's probably is like, you know what? That didn't work. And I'm going to take 5 minutes and beat myself up. I should, and I do, I write it down. You should have known better, blah, blah, blah. And then I take it and I wad it up and I throw it away. And then I say, but you know what? I really tried. And I gave it a best effort. One of the best things that I've found, and only recently, is I pretend that it wasn't me that made the mistake or did whatever. I pretend I'm talking to a dear friend. And I would never say any of the things I say to myself when I make a mistake to that person. And so I just pretend I am talking to a caring friend or a very close friend. And then I talk to myself that way. And I give myself the benefit of that love and care.
That's really interesting. And it reminds me of something that I read the other day, is the principle of the empty chair. And somebody was sharing how something that was therapeutic for them was they were talking to an empty chair.
Mm-hmm.
Much like what you're saying, and they were sharing everything that was on their heart, their mind, all the energy, all that negative energy that was just kind of in their spirit, and they were acting like there was somebody sitting in the chair, and they were sharing with them, and they were talking about how therapeutic that is to just kind of get that out and really pretend like you're talking to somebody, and how therapeutic that is for our spirit there.
Right. Yeah. Because our self-critic goes into overdrive.
Right.
And you can't ignore them. They're there. So you've got to say, yeah, you're right. I totally screwed up there. Yeah. And I'm going to learn from it. I'm not going to do it again. So they have their moment, but they don't get hours of your time. And
That's
then
so good.
Because we all have wonderful advice for people we care about.
Right.
We just don't always give it to ourselves.
That is so good, right? Oh, that's so good. Okay, so what I heard you say is take a fearless inventory of your strengths and weaknesses, and a strength overused can become a weakness. I heard you say another next step to these: practice that self-compassion. Give yourself some grace, and maybe follow the empty chair principle. Act like you're talking to a friend, and things like that. And then last I heard you say is find a way to find some personal balance in your life, maybe spiritually, or things of that nature, where you can be able to respond to situations, much like the tennis player you were talking about, when we feel overwhelmed. That I love that. So to kind of round the corner and take us home, do you have a favorite quote about resiliency?
Well, I have two. I have one that's kind of fun. And it's, if plan A, and by my favorite author, anonymous, if plan A doesn't work, stay calm. The alphabet has 25 more letters. So it just kind of
love that.
In perspective.
Yes.
And then the other one, a little more meaty, is from Mary Holloway. And it says, resilience is knowing that you are the only one that has the power and the responsibility to pick yourself up. Don't wait for anybody else to do it.
Wow.
And that really hit home, because so often, oh, how could this happen to me? Oh my gosh. And it's like, yep, it's bad, it's unfair, it's wrong. And only you can pick yourself up, and only you are fully invested in the next solution. Other people may be part of it, but if you're the leader, it's up to you.
Why is it tempting to play the victim ourselves?
It's so easy, because then it's somebody else's fault. And when you're a victim, it's also, you need a white knight then to come and save you. You are abdicating responsibility for the solution, and you're abdicating responsibility for the problem. It's not, it's someone else's fault. We feel it's our get out of jail free card, but really it's locking two more doors.
Because it's staying in jail. Yeah.
You're staying in jail.
Yeah. I love that. Well, Mary, we're going to have to do this again
Okay.
because you have dropped so much information on this call that we're going to have to go back and unpack some of this. But thank you so much for being here. I just appreciate your friendship so much. Before we close things out, is there anything left on your mind that you would want to share to our leaders listening as how they can grow in resiliency?
I think the bottom line is no one starts being perfectly resilient. You got to practice. So pick one or two things, even practice dealing with uncertainty. Purposely go to a situation where you don't know the outcome and
Mm,
see how you do. It's resilience is like any other skill. It's got to be practiced. It's got to be honed, and reflection, saying just paying attention to, ooh, how did I handle that? Or,
mm,
oh, could I do a better job, is really going to be the best starting place for yourself and for your organization. And then also find pockets of success.
mm.
Within any organization, there are some resilient people. Talk to them and think about, okay, how do we take some of those behaviors and try to make them more the norm? Think about yourself. Anybody listening, you have one or two resilient behaviors that maybe you haven't honed, but they're your starting point. You never start with your greatest weakness. You start with your strengths and build on them and then pull the weaknesses up. So it's just a matter of noticing and practicing, I think.
When you were sharing with that, the image that came to my mind was much like building a muscle. When you first start working out, you go straight maybe to the 10 or 15-pound dumbbells, but then after you've been doing it for a while, your muscles have become stronger, and you're up to the 20 to the 25 to the 30-pound weights. And so that to me, when I think back on my life, the way that I have built resilience is doing exactly what you said, walking into leadership posts that challenged me.
Mhm.
When I look back then, they weren't that big of challenges, but those challenges had a compound effect that, now, 20, 25 years later, I'm much more resilient now than I was when I was first leading at 24 years old. So I love that.
And also, you know what? It builds a portfolio of wins.
Mm,
So the next time you're going into an uncertain situation, you look back and say, wait, I wasn't comfortable with this or this or this. And look, I overcame those. So that also helps build your self-confidence. So
mhm.
all of us have a portfolio of wins, but we just haven't paid attention to them.
It's so good. Even to write them down because
Yeah.
we forget so much. We're on to
Mhm.
the next challenge, on to the next thing in our organization. So
Yeah.
I love that. Well, Mary, you have dropped some gold on this. Thank you
I'm
so
happy to help.
much. Thank you so much. You are such a friend to me, and I have been multiple times a phone call away for some advice or encouragement, and I just appreciate your friendship so much. We're going to have to do this again. And guys, if you're listening, thank you so much for tuning in with us and hearing this conversation about resiliency. Let's all go become better, resilient leaders. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Eric. I've enjoyed it. Bye-bye.